Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Wednesday, everybody. First up, we briefly cover 3 important updates related to the economy and financial system before moving on to the main story for today, which will be trade. China's crackdown on so-called hedonistic bankers, part of the wider common prosperity drive, has driven many mainlanders out of the profession. Many salaries in the financial sector have been frozen and bonuses cut by up to 90% in some cases. The industry has also been unnerved by a large-scale corruption drive, fueled in part by Beijing's concerns surrounding systemic financial risk and surging debt in recent years. In 2023 alone, more than 100 financial and executive officials were arrested on suspicion of corruption. Alicia Garcia Herrero, chief Asia-Pacific economist at Naxios, expressed this week, quote, "The slogans and crackdowns are all about control. Chinese leaders think control is needed to avoid financial instability and make sure lending is going into the sectors deemed important by the state, such as manufacturing." End quote. My apologies, I've had to move to a room next door because there is some construction in my office. There's a bit of an echo in here. Hopefully it is not too distracting. Let's continue. According to a recent survey by Morgan McKinley Limited, about 80% of firms in China's banking and financial services sector have lost talent in the past 6 months. Zhu Chen, a highly respected professor of finance at the University of Hong Kong, warns that this is all brutally transforming the sector permanently, and not for the best. Observing this week, quote, "I see a new Chinese economy coming into shape soon, in which the financial sector will have only 2 types of players, government-run banks and government-run insurance companies. While it will not totally go back to its pre-1978 planned economy mode, it will be close. Thus, China's financial sector will not need so many professionals, and many will have to find jobs elsewhere, whether there are other options or not." End quote. Next up, and on a similar theme, according to estimates by UBS Group AG published this week, China's state-backed funds have poured more than 410 billion yuan, $57 billion into onshore shares this year to prop up the market, and more should be on the way. The report found that more than 75% of the inflows from state funds went into products tracking the benchmark CSI 300 index, while another 13% flowed into those mirroring the CSI 500 index. We remember that in the lead-up to Lunar New Year, state funds were key in stabilizing the $8 trillion stock rout. The CSI 300 gauge has risen more than 7% this month, while an index of Chinese shares trading in Hong Kong has climbed more than 10%. One more update for the economy before we move on. Chinese financial media outlet Yicai reports today that mortgage rates in China have come down to the lowest level since 2008, after lenders slashed their 5-year loan prime rate by 25 basis points earlier this month, the first cut since last June. According to the think tank Beike Research Institute's study of 100 cities, the average borrowing rate for first-time home buyers came down to 3.59% this month, while the average for second home buyers was 4.16%, both a decline of 25 basis points from a year ago. Of course, all of this is about policy support for the crisis-hit housing sector. Yicai observes with today's report, quote, "Throughout 2023, China's housing market remained sluggish, and house prices in most cities fell sharply. As of December, 101 of the 343 cities in the country lowered the minimum mortgage rate for first homes, while 26 cancelled the lower limit. This is why the first home mortgage rate in 100 cities in February was lower than the 3.75% People's Bank of China set floor." End quote. According to a recent report by Changjiang Securities, with the drop in mortgage rates, the gross rental yield on properties in prime locations in some small cities is close to the mortgage rate, and even below in some larger cities. Okay, that is the economy. Next up, we move to the main story for today, global trade. But just quickly, I have a huge favor to ask. If you're enjoying today's video, it's a huge help if you can like and subscribe. It's just 2 clicks of the mouse, but it's a huge help for me and the channel. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description below for those who want to go the extra mile and help me keep the channel financially sustainable. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, one of the slow-moving trends which we have seen in recent years, part of the general fragmentation of the global order, has been the strain on the international trade system and breaking of that system along bloc lines. Variations of this trend have been given various names: trade war, decoupling, de-risking, etc. The World Trade Organization's 13th Ministerial Conference is meeting in Abu Dhabi this week, and a question on many lips is whether this institution will survive all of this. This year's meeting has also been especially politicized. On the eve of the conference, the US Trade Representative released its annual report on China's World Trade Organization compliance. The report, unsurprisingly, is damning, concluding, quote, "China remains the biggest challenge to the international trading system established by the World Trade Organization. It has been 22 years since China acceded to the WTO, and China still embraces a state-directed, non-market approach to the economy and trade, which runs counter to the norms and principles embodied by the World Trade Organization." End quote. Beijing hit back hard against the report. The head of the Department of WTO Affairs under China's Ministry of Commerce said that the Chinese government has, quote, "noted the unfounded accusations in this report," end quote, adding, quote, "The United States has disregarded China's significant achievements in fulfilling its WTO commitments. It has been using baseless and arbitrary standards to criticize China's trade and economic policies, showcasing its unilateralism and bullying behavior," end quote. State media was even more sharp with its language, with state-run Global Times writing yesterday, quote, "China has always firmly supported multilateral trade organizations with practical actions, but under the interference of US protectionism, multilateral trade organizations are indeed relatively fragile, and it is difficult to reach a satisfactory agreement. The US took the lead in paralyzing the dispute settlement mechanism," end quote. Despite the loud rhetoric, the two sides appear to have engaged in relatively constructive conversation, however. On Monday, China's Minister of Commerce met with the US Trade Representative, Catherine Tai, on the sidelines of the WTO Ministerial Conference. According to an official Chinese readout, the two sides had, quote, "professional and in-depth exchanges," end quote. In a very timely story, UK-based The Financial Times published an excellent piece this week called "China's Plan to Reshape World Trade on Its Own Terms," in which it argues that Beijing is seeking to construct an alternative trade architecture that is insulated from US interference and centered upon the developing world. It's worth examining some of the points made in the piece. Quote, "As the world trade body falters, Beijing's main strategy is to capitalize on ties with the global south, fostered through its $1 trillion Belt and Road Initiative, an investment program launched in 2013 that counts more than 140 countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and elsewhere as its participants. The architecture under construction revolves around a China-centric network of bilateral and regional free trade agreements, which allow for trade at low tariffs while also promoting direct investment flows. This network, which currently includes 28 countries and territories that take close to 40% of China's exports, means that the World Trade Organization's mandate to keep the world open for liberalized trade unravels. China will have at least a partial backup system in place. None of China's FTAs include the US or countries inside the EU. Michael Power, an emerging markets expert at 91, an asset manager, sees China's commercial engagement with developing nations as evidence the world is tilting on its axis. China is not just trying to create an alternative world order, it is succeeding, says Power. Many in the West cannot gauge the success China is having in the rest of the world, he added. End quote. Okay. This is the global trade architecture. Now let's move from the proverbial forest to the trees. Quote, "Every day it feels like we're getting closer to significant trade actions against PRC cars from the US, the EU, and now the UK governments. The PRC cars are very competitive in terms of performance, fit and finish, and of course price. The PRC government and car makers say allegations of subsidies are unfair, but Shenzhen's new 2024 plan for promoting automobile exports probably will not help things." End quote. Indeed, on Monday, after his meeting with Tai, China's Minister of Commerce Wang said that China is highly concerned about the EU's trade remedy investigation targeting Chinese electric vehicles and other products, while also expressing strong dissatisfaction regarding the investigation, quote, which lacks a factual basis, end quote. The same day, the Chinese megacity of Shenzhen, where the world's largest electric vehicle maker BYD has its headquarters, unveiled 24 measures including support for factory construction, opening new sea routes, and allowing another 20 companies to export second-hand cars. The policy was crafted to, quote, seize the opportunity for the development of car exports, end quote. Other support measures include encouraging Chinese banks to provide customer financing for overseas car buyers and calling for exporters to purchase more car-carrying ships to create a Chinese-owned fleet of roll-on, roll-off vessels. A report from Chinese financial media outlet Caixin this week provides excellent context to understand why China is making this push for exports now. Quote, with China's massive production capacity, fierce domestic competition and price wars, the time might have come for Chinese-made cars to make a large-scale entry into overseas markets. On the one hand, the onset of price wars will reduce many companies' profits compared with 2023, and they will urgently need to find more lucrative new markets. On the other hand, automakers increasing their technology and supply chain investments need massive production capacities to amortize the new technology expenses, and entering overseas markets is definitely a beneficial supplement to domestic market sales. Moreover, after enduring and surviving a brutally competitive market, Chinese automakers are likely to possess great competitive strength in the global automotive market in terms of product and technology capabilities, end quote. But a big factor is also, of course, state subsidies, and indeed, as Bishop just observed, the UK appears to be joining the EU and the US in its own concern for subsidized Chinese cars. US-based Politico reports yesterday, citing two unnamed sources, that Britain is considering whether to investigate Chinese state subsidies for electric vehicle makers. The piece explains that British automakers are urging the UK government to speed up its own work. Quote, amid concerns that the UK will see a flood of Chinese-made EVs diverted into its market from the EU if the bloc slaps duties on imports when its probe wraps up later this year, end quote. Chinese car makers continue to strongly deny accusations of success being due to high subsidy support. Michael Shu, European president of BYD, in a statement this week expressed, quote, our success is not because of the subsidy, it's because we have unique technology, and our management efficiency is high. It's because we invested in this technology much earlier, and much more than competitors. It's not because of the subsidy, end quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Wednesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.